A racist police officer unjustly ties a black elderly woman to a telephone pole, accusing her of disturbing the peace even though she's simply trying to find her way home. As she tries to explain he has no idea that her son is a high-ranking officer in the military, the truth revealed afterward leaves the officer stunned. This story is not only a journey of a family seeking justice but also a powerful voice for the thousands of people who have silently endured injustice in society. Follow this dramatic story and don't forget to share where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel today to help spread this meaningful message and not miss out on other inspiring stories. Night had fallen on the quiet neighborhood where the dim street lights flickered, casting faint shadows on the old buildings. The cold night breeze rustled through the alleys, carrying with it a chill of solitude and silence. On a sidewalk littered with dry leaves, an elderly woman stood, motionless, clutching an old handbag. Her cloudy eyes reflected traces of sadness and unease. This was Dorothy, a woman once beloved and respected by the entire neighborhood. Dorothy was no ordinary person. She had dedicated her entire life to fighting for justice and kindness. From a young age, Dorothy had been a renowned social activist. She organized free classes for underprivileged children, campaigned for the establishment of community libraries, and tirelessly stood up for the rights of the disadvantaged. She was the first to help struggling families find shelter, bringing hope to homeless children. Even in her later years, Dorothy was remembered as a symbol of courage and compassion. The values Dorothy embodied extended far beyond the community. She passed them down to her only son, Jonathan, a high-ranking officer in the military. Jonathan grew up under her firm yet loving guidance. Dorothy's words always echoed in his mind: always help others, my son, because one day you may need help yourself. And now Dorothy, a woman who had been beacon of light for so many, found herself in an unimaginable situation, lost and isolated in the very place she had devoted her life to improving. Dorothy walked slowly along a street she thought was familiar, but tonight everything seemed different. The flickering streetlights and encroaching shadows turned every corner into an alien landscape. Memories of her vibrant days as an activist flooded her mind. She recalled the smiles of children receiving new books and the laughter that filled the air during charity events she had organized. But tonight Dorothy wasn't the one spreading hope, she was the one in need of rescue. A sense of unease crept into her heart as the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk grew increasingly rare. The neighborhood was eerily silent save for the wind whistling through the buildings. The cold wind bit at her skin, but Dorothy tried to steady herself. It's all right, Dorothy, she whispered to herself. You just need to find your way back like always, but this time things wouldn't be like always. Somewhere in the darkness a threat awaited her, something she with all her years of bravery and strength was unprepared to face. A shadow was approaching, carrying intentions she could never have imagined. Dorothy's story is not just one of survival, it is a tale of justice, compassion, and the enduring power of familial love. What lies ahead will not only change Dorothy's life forever but also serve as a powerful reminder that even the strongest among us sometimes need protection. Are you ready to embark on this journey? Let's uncover what awaits Dorothy on this fateful night, a night that will not only alter her destiny but also reveal a painful truth about the society we live in. Dorothy pulled her thin coat tightly around her frail body, trying to shield herself from the biting night wind. The street, so familiar by day, now seemed foreign and menacing under the cover of darkness. She stood still on the sidewalk, narrowing her eyes as she scanned her surroundings for a recognizable landmark, but there was only shadow and dim flickering streetlights. Earlier that day Dorothy had felt joy. She had spent the afternoon at the community center, a place she frequented for activities with friends. They had played dominoes, shared jokes, and reminisced. The warmth and laughter of those gatherings always made her feel young again, as if time had never touched her. But now as she walked the familiar route home she realized she was lost. She stopped, her trembling hands clutching her worn handbag. Dorothy turned to look back, trying to recognize the path she had just taken, but everything seemed blurred under the weak light of the street lamps. She reassured herself, it's all right, Dorothy, it's just another street, you'll find your way home. She walked slowly, trying to recall familiar landmarks, the small bakery at the corner, the grocery store she often visited, but none appeared. All she saw were faceless buildings with faded signs. The darkness grew thicker and the silence became suffocating. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood by day had vanished, leaving only the eerie howling of the wind. A memory came rushing back. Dorothy recalled her younger days leading children from the neighborhood to school. She had taught them how to navigate their way using simple markers, look for colorful signs, count the lampposts, and never forget where you started. Dorothy had always been proud of teaching the children how to find their way, yet here she was trapped in a situation she had never prepared for. She chuckled faintly, a hollow, sorrowful sound. How ironic, she murmured, her voice barely audible in the cold air. I taught others never to get lost, and here I am lost myself. Dorothy tried to stay calm. Just retrace your steps, Dorothy, like you told the kids, you'll be fine. She turned back, determined to return the way she had come, hoping to spot something familiar, but the more she walked the more it felt as if the world itself was conspiring against her. The flickering street Lights, the long shadows stretching across the pavement and the identical-looking streets blurred together, leaving her disoriented. After several minutes, Dorothy realized she had been walking in circles. She sighed, her legs aching with fatigue. How could I get lost in the very place I've lived all my life, she muttered, frustration rising within her. Her hands shook as she reached into her bag to retrieve the phone her son Jonathan had bought her years ago. A glimmer of hope flickered in her heart as she pressed the power button, but the screen remained dark. The battery was dead. Dorothy stared at the phone in her hand, a wave of helplessness washing over her. How could I forget to charge it, she scolded herself, her voice hoarse. She placed the phone back into her bag and looked down the dimly lit street. For the first time in years, she felt utterly alone. Here is the next segment. The sparse figures of passers-by moved quickly, glancing her way but never stopping to ask if she needed help. Everyone seemed consumed by their own lives, hurrying home to escape the night's chill. Dorothy wanted to call out to someone, anyone, but hesitation held her back. Shame at her inability to find her way paralyzed her. In her mind, she heard her voice from years ago teaching Jonathan, stand on your own 2 feet, my son. Don't rely on others unless you truly need to. But this time, Dorothy knew she truly needed help. She gazed up at the sky where faint stars peeked through the city's haze. Please, she whispered, as if praying to the heavens, someone help me. As her footsteps echoed on the cold pavement, Dorothy couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was lurking in the darkness. A faint but unmistakable sense of danger was drawing closer. Dorothy kept walking, her steps growing heavier with every moment. Exhausted, she clung to a fragile hope, repeating to herself, just keep moving. Someone will help me. And then, as if by a miracle, she heard the low hum of an engine in the distance. A police car, its red and blue lights flashing, appeared at the end of the street. She felt an overwhelming wave of relief, her eyes welling with tears. Finally, someone will help me, she whispered, her voice trembling but full of hope. She raised her hand and waved vigorously to catch the car's attention. As it slowly pulled over to the curb, Dorothy hastened toward it, her eyes lit with anticipation. The door opened, and a tall man in uniform stepped out, his polished badge gleaming under the streetlight. Across his chest, Dorothy read the name Officer Jacob Blake. Thank God, ***, Dorothy thought to herself. This was a police officer, a representative of law and order. But her relief quickly gave way to unease as she caught sight of Blake's expression. There was no warmth, no intention to assist. His cold eyes and mocking smirk seemed to taunt her. Blake stepped forward, scrutinizing Dorothy from head to toe with an air of disdain. What are you doing out here, old lady? He said with biting sarcasm. Didn't anyone tell you this isn't a place for people like you? Dorothy hesitated, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. People like you, what did he mean? She tried to steady herself, though a wave of apprehension began to rise. I'm just trying to find my way home, ***, she said, her voice quivering. I'm lost. Blake's smirk widened as he stepped closer, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. Home? He mocked. Where exactly do you think you belong? An old woman wandering the streets at this hour, looking for trouble, are you? His voice was low, but each word carried an unmistakable menace. Dorothy felt her chest tighten. She clutched her bag tightly and took a step back. No, I just want to get home, she repeated, hoping he would understand. But Blake's smirk only grew more sinister. You think anyone cares what you want? Blake sneered, his tone icy. No one cares, old lady. Tonight, no one's coming to save you. Panic surged through Dorothy. She turned to leave, but before she could move, Blake grabbed her arm with a vice-like grip. The sharp pain made her cry out involuntarily. Please, ***, she pleaded. I didn't do anything wrong. Silence. Blake snapped, his eyes glinting with malice. You think you can do whatever you want out here? Causing trouble, disrupting everything, you need to be taught a lesson. Dorothy struggled to free herself, but her frail strength was no match for Blake's brute force. Please don't do this. I just want to go home, ***, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But Blake was unmoved. He dragged her toward a nearby lamppost. Dorothy screamed, her voice echoing into the eerie silence of the deserted street, but no one came. The distant streetlights flickered dimly, and the windows of nearby buildings remained firmly shut. No one heard. No one came. Blake pulled a roll of silver duct tape from his belt. Dorothy's eyes widened in horror as the metallic sheen caught the faint light. "Please don't do this. I beg you, ***, she sobbed. But her cries fell on deaf ears. Blake forced her arms behind her and began wrapping the tape around her body, binding her from shoulders to ankles. Dorothy writhed in desperation, but it was futile. Each turn of the tape robbed her of more than her freedom, it stripped away her dignity. Her frail body trembled under the cold, constricting bands, her breathing shallow and labored. When Blake was finished, he stepped back to admire his work, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "There. Now you'll stay quiet, ***, he said with mocking satisfaction. "You think someone's going to save you? No one's coming. No one cares." Dorothy gazed at him with pleading eyes, but Blake merely laughed. He turned and strode back to his patrol car. The engine roared to life, and the red and blue lights flashed one last time before disappearing into the night. The street fell back into a deathly silence, leaving Dorothy alone, tightly bound to the lamppost. She tried to scream again, but her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Tears streamed down her weathered face, mixing with the cold of the night. "Please, ***, she murmured in despair. But there was no answer. No one came. As she stood there, trapped and shivering, Blake's words echoed in her mind, "No one cares." But Dorothy refused to surrender hope entirely. Deep within, she clung to the belief that someone, somewhere, would hear her cries. She prayed in that desolate darkness that help would come before it was too late. Dorothy stood frozen, bound tightly to the cold lamppost. Her body ached from the constricting tape, her fingers numb, her legs trembling. Yet the weight in her heart was heavier than the chill surrounding her. Darkness consumed the street ahead, stretching endlessly into the void. Summoning her last ounce of strength, she cried out, "Help me, please." Her voice pierced the still night, but only silence answered. The faint silhouettes of passing strangers moved quickly, illuminated by the weak glow of distant streetlights. Dorothy spotted a man in a suit, briefcase in hand, hurrying in her direction. She called out again, her voice raspy, "Please, sir, help me." The man heard her cry and paused, glancing at Dorothy from afar. His eyes betrayed a moment of hesitation before he quickly turned away, walking faster, his head bowed as if he hadn't seen anything. "Please, ***, Dorothy whispered weakly, her voice fading into the cold air. The next figures were no different. A young couple strolled by, hand in hand, engaged in quiet conversation. Dorothy mustered her strength and shouted, "Help me, please." The young woman turned her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What's going on over there?" she asked her companion. He shrugged and pulled her along. "Don't get involved. We don't know what's happening." Tears streamed down Dorothy's face as she tried to yell louder. "I'm tied up here. Please help me." But no one stopped. Everyone turned away, ignoring her pleas as if they didn't exist. Time passed, and Dorothy saw a group of 5 or 6 teenagers approaching, their laughter echoing through the street. Clinging to a shred of hope, she shouted, "Please, boys, help me. I'm tied up here." The teenagers stopped, their faces a mix of surprise and amusement. One of them burst out laughing. "Look at that, an old lady tied to a lamppost." Another pulled out his phone, chuckling as he said, "This is priceless. Let's take a picture." The flash from the phone's camera lit up Dorothy's tear-streaked face. Dorothy turned her head as much as she could, trying to avoid the camera, but the tape bound her too tightly. "Please don't do this. Help me, I beg you, ***, she cried. But instead of helping, the teenagers laughed louder. One even started recording a video, narrating with glee. "This has got to be the craziest thing I've seen all week. Uploading this." Their laughter was a dagger to Dorothy's already shattered dignity. She hung her head, sobbing silently, wishing they would leave her alone. When the group finally left, Dorothy's fragile hope seemed to vanish. But then, out of the darkness, a hoarse voice called out, "Ma'am, are you all right?" Dorothy lifted her head to see an older man, his weary frame moving toward her. He wore a tattered coat, his hands carrying a plastic bag filled with empty bottles, a homeless man. His eyes were filled with genuine concern as he approached. "Please help me," Dorothy whispered, tears streaming down her face. The man put down his bag, studying her with a mixture of pity and outrage. "Who did this to you?" "This is disgusting," he exclaimed, stepping closer. He reached for the tape, but before he could act, heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Blake reappeared, his face dark with fury at the sight. "What do you think you're doing here?" he growled. The homeless man flinched, turning to face Blake. I just saw her and thought she needed help," he stammered, his voice shaking but his gaze steady. "This isn't your business," Blake snapped, stepping closer. His hand rested on his belt near his gun, his presence menacing. "I'm telling you to walk away. Now." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Dorothy and Blake. He clenched his fists, wanting to resist, but Blake's cold smirk and the threat in his tone made it clear he had no choice. "You'd better mind your own business," Blake said, his voice calm but laced with danger. "Or I'll make sure you regret it." The homeless man lowered his head, picking up his bag with a trembling hand. Before leaving, he glanced back at Dorothy, his voice filled with regret. "I'm sorry I can't help you. But I won't let this go." Dorothy could say nothing, only watching the silhouette of the man fade into the night. A single tear traced down her wrinkled face. The fragile glimmer of hope that had briefly surfaced was extinguished once more. Darkness enveloped her again, accompanied only by the cold whistle of the wind through the empty street. Yet deep inside, a faint belief lingered, a hope that somewhere, someone would not abandon her forever. In the distance, the homeless man walked away, but in his heart, a growing determination took root. He would not remain silent. He had seen everything, and he knew what he had to do. In another part of the city, Jonathan was wrapping up his final tasks of the day at the military base. As a high-ranking officer, he was no stranger to discipline and intense focus. But tonight, a strange sense of unease weighed on him. It was as though he instinctively knew something was wrong. His phone suddenly buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a call from Mrs. Marin, the trusted neighbor who lived next door to his mother. Jonathan quickly picked up. "Hello, Mrs. Marin, he greeted warmly, but the worry in her voice immediately struck him. "Jonathan, your mother hasn't come home. I haven't seen her since this afternoon." "Something's not right, she said, her tone urgent. Jonathan's heart sank. He fought to keep calm and asked, "Are you sure? Maybe she went somewhere and just hasn't returned yet." "No, son, Mrs. Marin replied, her voice filled with concern. "She never stays out this late without telling anyone. It's dark now, and I'm worried. You need to find her right away." Jonathan didn't waste a second. He thanked Mrs. Marin, grabbed his keys, and rushed out of the base, climbing into his jeep. As he sped through the city streets, vivid memories of his mother filled his mind, the woman who had raised him single-handedly, teaching him the principles of right and wrong, courage and compassion. Driving through the streets, childhood memories surfaced. Jonathan remembered the times his mother had taken him to struggling neighborhoods, teaching him that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, deserved to be treated with dignity. "Always help others, Jonathan, she used to say, her eyes shining with conviction. The world is harsh enough, don't make it worse." Those words now echoed in his mind like a command. But the thought of his mother, someone who had spent her life helping others, now being in distress filled him with anguish. That anguish soon morphed into a simmering anger. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he resolved to find her and ensure no harm came to her. "Mom, who did this to you?" Jonathan asked, his voice low and steady. Dorothy looked up, her tear-streaked face full of pain. "It was a police officer," she whispered. "He said no one cared." Her words ignited a fire in Jonathan. His hands clenched into fists, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. How could someone entrusted with upholding justice abuse their power so cruelly? "I promise you, Mom," Jonathan said, his voice firm and resolute. "I won't let this go. He will pay for what he's done." Jonathan gently helped Dorothy into the Jeep, carefully wrapping her in a coat to keep her warm. As he started the engine, his eyes locked onto the road ahead, filled with determination. The image of his strong, principled mother burned brightly in his mind. Now, he would do everything in his power to protect her and ensure that those who exploited their authority for harm would face justice. Jonathan drove home with Dorothy, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, though his mind was consumed with thoughts of the battle to come. His mother was safe, but this was far from over. Blake, the officer who had hurt her, needed to be held accountable. And not just Blake, the system that had allowed such behavior to persist needed to be dismantled. Once they reached home, Jonathan carefully carried Dorothy to the sofa, gently covering her with a blanket. "Rest, Mom. I'll take care of everything," he reassured her, his tone steady and comforting. Dorothy nodded weakly, her eyes filled with trust. She knew that when Jonathan promised something, he would see it through, no matter what. Jonathan wasted no time. He opened his laptop and accessed the city's public security systems, using his high-level military credentials. He combed through hours of surveillance footage from the area where his mother had been attacked. After an hour of searching, he spotted Blake's patrol car on the screen. Fast-forwarding the video, Jonathan's stomach churned as he watched the scene unfold, his mother tied to the street lamp while Blake stood nearby, smirking. His grip tightened on the mouse, his eyes burning with fury. But Jonathan knew that anger alone wasn't enough to take down someone like Blake. He needed irrefutable evidence. Determined, Jonathan decided to find a key witness. His mother had mentioned the homeless man who had tried to help her. Driving to the nearby area where the man was known to frequent, Jonathan searched for hours. Finally, he spotted the man sitting on the curb, clutching a worn bag. Jonathan approached, kneeling to meet his gaze. "I'm the son of the woman you tried to help last night, he began, his tone steady but heartfelt. The man eyed Jonathan warily, but the sincerity in his voice softened the tension. Slowly, the man nodded. "Blake, the man rasped. "I've seen him before, always bullying people, throwing his weight around. But last night was too much. I can't stay silent anymore." Jonathan listened intently as the man recounted the events in detail. He even produced a blurry photo from an old phone showing Blake threatening him. Jonathan realized the man would be a crucial witness in holding Blake accountable. But Jonathan didn't stop there. He contacted Mike, an old military comrade now working in a special security division that investigated abuses of power within government agencies. Jonathan's call was brief but urgent. "Mike, I need you to investigate an officer, Jacob Blake. I have reason to believe he's not only abused my mother but has a history of other crimes." After a pause, Mike replied, "Got it. I'll dig into him. But be careful, Jonathan. If Blake's been abusing his power, he might not be acting alone. The system could push back hard." Jonathan exhaled, his resolve unshaken. "I know. But I can't sit back and do nothing." Shortly after their call, Mike sent Jonathan a file containing Blake's troubling history, numerous complaints of excessive force, threats, and even mysterious disappearances of civilians who had crossed paths with him. Shockingly, many of these reports had been erased or dismissed without investigation. As Jonathan read through the damning evidence, his jaw clenched. This wasn't just about one rogue officer, it was a corrupted system protecting him. Jonathan called Mike again. "Can you find out who else works closely with Blake? Any regular collaborators?" "Absolutely, Mike replied. "But Jonathan, listen, if you're going to take on the system, you'll need backup. Don't do this alone." Jonathan nodded grimly. "I understand. Thanks, Mike." Hanging up, Jonathan sat staring at his laptop screen. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together: Blake's abuses, the system's cover-ups, and the pain it had inflicted on victims like his mother. His emotions swirled, a storm of rage and determination. Jonathan wasn't just fighting for his mother, he was fighting to prove that justice could prevail and that men like Blake would no longer wield unchecked power. Jonathan parked his car in front of the police station, the imposing building standing tall like a fortress in the heart of the city. Stepping out, his military uniform accentuated his commanding and resolute presence. In his hand, he carried a dossier packed with damning evidence against Blake and the enablers who had shielded him. His cold, steely gaze reflected the anger he had been suppressing since rescuing his mother. As he entered the main lobby, the air seemed to grow heavier. A few officers recognized him, Jonathan Harris, a high-ranking military officer, and instinctively straightened up, their eyes a mix of apprehension and respect. Jonathan neither greeted them nor offered any explanation. He simply strode purposefully toward the front desk. "I need to see Officer Jacob Blake, ****, Jonathan said, his voice deep and clear. The desk officer hesitated, glancing at his colleague nervously. "Officer Blake is in the break room," he stammered. "Is there an issue, sir?" Jonathan didn't respond. He nodded curtly and headed down the corridor leading to the station's inner rooms. The sound of his boots echoed on the tiled floor, heightening the tension in the building. When he reached the door to the break room, Jonathan paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He tightened his grip on the door handle, pushed it open forcefully, and stepped inside. Blake was lounging in a chair, his legs propped up on the table, a coffee cup in hand. He exuded an air of carefree indifference, but the moment he saw Jonathan, his demeanor shifted. The cup froze midway to his lips, his eyes widened, and he struggled to mask his unease. "General Harris, ***, Blake said with a forced, nervous chuckle, attempting to appear calm. "What brings you here?" "I wasn't aware we had business to discuss." Jonathan didn't reply immediately. He walked closer, his piercing gaze fixed on Blake. When he was just a few steps away, he stopped, his voice cold and cutting. "You know why I'm here, Blake. Don't pretend." Blake let out a dry laugh, but it lacked confidence. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, feigning ignorance. "If there's an issue, it must be a misunderstanding." Jonathan slammed the dossier onto the table in front of Blake. "Misunderstanding?" he said, his tone low but laced with intensity. "This is a record of every time you've abused your authority, not just against my mother, but countless others. Did you think these acts would just disappear?" Blake glanced at the dossier, then looked up, his facade of composure beginning to crack. "Listen," he began, his voice faltering. "I was just doing my job. Sometimes we have to be tough to maintain order. Every officer does it, not just me." Jonathan's fists clenched, his glare growing even sharper. "Every officer does it?" he repeated, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "Are you seriously suggesting that tying an innocent elderly woman to a street lamp is normal police procedure?" Blake dropped his gaze, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. "I thought it was just a joke. I didn't know she was your mother." "You didn't know she was my mother?" Jonathan roared, his voice reverberating through the room. "Do you think that changes anything? Do you think her being my mother or not excuses the fact that you humiliated, abused, and abandoned a vulnerable person in her worst moment?" Blake's head shot up, his face pale as a sheet. He tried to stammer out a response. I have a family, children. I was just under pressure. Being a cop isn't easy." Jonathan took another step forward, his presence towering over Blake. "You talk about pressure? Do you use that as an excuse to harm others? My mother taught me that no matter how hard life gets, we must never lose our humanity." "And you? What did you do with the power entrusted to you by the people?" Blake had no answer. He sat hunched, his hands balled into fists, not out of remorse, but out of the fear now consuming him. Jonathan took a step back, his eyes still locked on Blake. "I'm not here to listen to your excuses," he said, his voice dropping but no less menacing. "I'm here to ensure you pay for what you've done, not just to my mother, but to every victim you've wronged." At that moment, the door swung open, and a group of officers entered the room. These were the ones Jonathan had informed before his arrival. Among them was Blake's commanding officer, who stepped forward with a stern expression. "Blake, ***, the superior officer said firmly. You are hereby suspended from duty, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Blake stood frozen, his face drained of color, cold sweat dripping down his brow. His hands were cuffed in front of his colleagues. Gone was the smug arrogance. Gone was the crooked smile. All that remained was a man exposed, a weak, frightened criminal. "You can't do this to me!" Blake shouted, his voice trembling with desperation. "I've served this force for years. I have a family, kids, you don't understand." Jonathan stood tall, his cold, unwavering gaze fixed on Blake. "You're right," he said, his voice like steel. "We don't understand. No one can comprehend how a police officer, someone sworn to protect the public, could use their power to harm those they're meant to serve. No one can understand your lack of humanity." The other officers exchanged uneasy glances. Many of them were familiar with Blake's antics, but now, standing before Jonathan, an imposing figure of justice, they dared not speak up. "Take him away," Jonathan ordered, his tone resolute. Two officers stepped forward, each taking one of Blake's arms. But just as they began to lead him out, Blake suddenly broke down. He collapsed to his knees, his head hitting the cold floor with a dull thud. "Wait! Wait! You can't just pin this all on me!" Blake screamed, his voice breaking with desperation. "I wasn't the only one. I wasn't acting alone." The room fell silent. All eyes now fixed on Blake. Jonathan narrowed his gaze, his voice sharp as a blade. "What are you saying?" Blake looked up, his tear-streaked face contorted with panic. "You think I did this on my own?" He spat bitterly. "This entire system operates this way. I was just doing what I saw others do before me. I'm not the only one abusing power." Jonathan leaned in closer, his voice low but commanding. "Explain." Blake's eyes darted nervously around the room, landing on a few officers near the door. He pointed a shaking finger at them. "Them!" he yelled. "They've done it too, intimidating, coercing, abusing their power. None of us are clean." The accused officers recoiled, some stepping forward in protest, others retreating in fear. "He's lying!" One of them shouted. "He's trying to drag us down with him." Blake let out a bitter laugh, tinged with despair. "You think I'll go down alone? No way. If I'm falling, I'm taking everyone with me." Jonathan surveyed the chaos, his expression unreadable. He turned to Blake's commanding officer, who had remained silent. "What are you going to do about this?" Jonathan asked, his voice carrying a weight that demanded action. The senior officer, his face tight with stress, sighed heavily. "I'll launch a full investigation," he said firmly. "Not just into Blake, but into everyone involved. No one who abuses their power will be spared." Jonathan nodded, his gaze still burning into Blake. "You think dragging others down with you will save you?" he said coldly. "But it won't change the fact that you destroyed lives. Justice is coming, not just for my mother, but for everyone you've hurt." Blake was hauled to his feet, his face pale with terror as he was led away. "You'll see!" he screamed. "I'm not the only one. The whole system is corrupt." His voice echoed through the station as the doors slammed shut behind him. Jonathan stood motionless, his gaze unwavering as he watched Blake disappear. The tension in the room was palpable, but something had shifted, a ripple of accountability that could no longer be ignored. The officers left behind seemed to realize the same truth: they could no longer hide from the reckoning that was coming. After Blake's arrest, Jonathan returned home. However, this victory could not erase the trauma Dorothy had endured. The house, once her sanctuary of peace, now felt unfamiliar and cold. Every evening, Dorothy would instinctively glance toward the window, her clouded eyes reflecting an invisible fear. Jonathan sat in the living room, his hands gripping his knees, his gaze fixed on the frail figure of his mother huddled in a chair. Dorothy tried to appear strong, but every small movement, her startled reactions to strange noises or her compulsive habit of checking the window whenever the cat tapped on it, betrayed the haunting memories that clung to her. "Mom, is there anything you need?" Jonathan asked gently, his voice tinged with concern. He had asked this question many times, and each time Dorothy simply shook her head with a faint, fragile smile. "I'm fine, my son," she replied, though her trembling voice betrayed her words. Jonathan felt a painful squeeze in his chest. He knew his mother was trying to be brave, but her attempts only deepened his sorrow. As a military officer, he had faced life-threatening situations, but nothing compared to the anguish of seeing his beloved mother hurt like this. Lisa, Jonathan's wife, entered the room carrying a soft blanket. She gently draped it over Dorothy's shoulders and smiled warmly. "Mom, you don't have to hide how you feel. If you're worried or scared, just tell us," Lisa said, her tone as soothing as her touch. Dorothy gave Lisa a small smile, but her gaze quickly drifted away, lost in the void. "I don't want to burden you both," she whispered. "Jonathan already has enough to worry about." Hearing this, Jonathan bowed his head, guilt washing over him. "That's not true, Mom," he said, his voice trembling. "I should have protected you sooner. I should have been there to make sure no one could hurt you." Dorothy looked at her son, her tear-filled eyes softening. She placed her hand on his, squeezing it gently. "Jonathan, I could never blame you. I'm proud of everything you've done. All I need is to know that you're here with me, that's enough." But despite her reassurances, Dorothy could not hide the unease within her. Each night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the horrifying images of that night replaying in her mind: Blake's cold, cruel eyes, the laughter of indifferent bystanders, and the suffocating feeling of being abandoned in the darkness. Lisa noticed Dorothy's restlessness and light sleep. One evening, she quietly sat beside her mother-in-law's bed. "Mom, if you ever feel like talking, I'm always here," she said, holding Dorothy's hand. Dorothy turned to Lisa, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Thank you, Lisa. I'm afraid that if I speak about it, I'll only trouble you and Jonathan more. I don't want to add to your worries." Lisa smiled, squeezing Dorothy's hand tightly. "You're not a burden, Mom. We're here to remind you that you're never alone. We all need time to heal." Jonathan stood quietly outside the door, listening to Lisa and his mother. His heart ached with gratitude for his wife and sorrow for his mother. He silently vowed to do everything in his power to help Dorothy through this difficult time. In the days that followed, Jonathan and Lisa took turns comforting Dorothy. Lisa often cooked her favorite meals, while Jonathan spent more time at home, watching shows with his mother that she used to enjoy. Gradually, Dorothy began to find a small measure of peace. She stopped startling at every little noise and, at times, even chuckled softly at Lisa's humorous stories. One morning, as Jonathan was preparing to leave for a meeting related to the ongoing investigation, Dorothy called him over. "Jonathan, I want to thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "You didn't just save me from that terrible night, you've made me feel like I still matter. I know it hasn't been easy for you to handle all of this." Jonathan pulled his mother into a tight embrace. "Mom, you mean everything to me. Everything I do is for you. I promise I won't let anyone hurt you again." In the days following Blake's arrest, a video of Jonathan confronting him at the police station unexpectedly leaked online. The footage, showing Blake's panicked attempts to justify his actions with the statement, "All cops do this," sparked widespread outrage. What began as a personal story quickly became a national scandal. The hashtag Justice for Dorothy began trending, spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. Viewers of the video not only empathized with Dorothy's ordeal but were also incensed by Blake's confession, which exposed systemic abuse of power within law enforcement. "This isn't just about Dorothy," a prominent Twitter post read. "This is about countless others who have suffered in silence. We need to speak up and demand justice." Similar posts flooded the internet, rallying people to join a movement for police reform. Clips of Dorothy, her face etched with pain yet radiating resilience, amplified the emotional impact and galvanized action. Many began sharing their own experiences as victims of police misconduct, using hashtags like #StopPoliceAbuse and #AccountabilityNow alongside #JusticeForDorothy. Dorothy's story became a symbol for a broader fight against systemic injustice.
Major human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and the ACLU, quickly joined the movement.
Their representatives called for investigations not only into Dorothy's case but also into widespread abuse of power within police forces nationwide.
"We cannot allow a system like this to persist unchecked," a spokesperson declared at a press conference. "Without individuals like Jonathan standing up, how many more people would endure what Dorothy went through?"
After weeks of turmoil, Jonathan decided his mother needed time to truly heal. With Lisa's support, the family chose the Maldives as their destination, a place of pristine beaches, white sands, and serene surroundings that could help Dorothy escape the lingering shadows of her trauma.
As the plane landed, the brilliant sunshine of the island paradise seemed to welcome the family.
Dorothy gazed out the window, her eyes reflecting awe at the beauty of the sea and sky merging. Since the night at the police station, her mood had been unstable, but this moment of vast tranquility offered her a rare sense of calm. At the resort, Dorothy sat on a lounge chair overlooking the ocean, surrounded by wicker furniture and sun umbrellas. A cool sea breeze, carrying the faint scent of tropical flowers, brushed past her, loosening the tension in her shoulders. Lisa approached with a fresh coconut drink, setting it gently on the small table beside her.
"How are you feeling, Mom?" Lisa asked with a gentle smile.
Dorothy nodded slightly, her gaze fixed on the distance where gentle waves kissed the white sands. "It's beautiful, Lisa," she replied softly, her voice filled with emotion.
"It's been so long since I felt peaceful like this."
Lisa smiled and sat beside her. "You know, Caleb has been planning an entire agenda to play with you. On the plane, he wouldn't stop talking about teaching you how to build sandcastles."
Dorothy chuckled lightly.
"Then I'll be his assistant architect." Soon after, Caleb, the young son of Jonathan and Lisa, came running toward Dorothy with a small bucket full of sand. "Grandma, help me build a castle," he exclaimed, his bright eyes filled with excitement. Dorothy looked at her grandson, and for the first time since that fateful night, a genuine smile appeared on her face. She stood up, her steps still slow, and followed Caleb to the shore.
"This is the main tower, Grandma. You have to make it tall,"
Caleb instructed, his face serious. Dorothy nodded, following his lead, her hands carefully shaping the sand. Occasionally, Caleb giggled when part of the castle collapsed, but Dorothy simply smiled and started again, savoring every moment like a balm to her soul.
Jonathan watched from a distance, warmth filling his chest. He sought his mother, once trembling and fearful, now smiling with a tenderness that lit up her face as she played with Caleb. Lisa stood beside him, holding his hand. "Look at her, Jonathan," she said softly. "She's beginning to find herself again." Jonathan nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. "I haven't seen her smile like that since everything happened. Seeing her like this makes it all worth it." That evening, the family gathered on a private beach at the resort.
Candlelight flickered on the dinner table, blending with the gentle sound of waves caressing the shore. Jonathan had arranged a special meal featuring fresh seafood and Dorothy's favorite dishes.
"Grandma, eat this lobster."
"It's so good," Caleb said, holding out his small fork to Dorothy. Dorothy smiled warmly, her eyes full of love for her grandson.
"Thank you, Caleb. I'll eat a lot so I can have enough energy to play with you tomorrow." Her words made the entire family laugh.
Lisa glanced at Dorothy, her heart brimming with hope. She realized that while the wounds in Dorothy's heart had not fully healed, the love and unity of their family were giving her the strength to move forward. One morning, Dorothy and Jonathan took a quiet walk along the beach at sunrise. The ocean was calm, and the sky blazed with the golden hues of dawn. Dorothy walked slowly, lightly holding Jonathan's arm as if drawing strength from him.
"How are you feeling now, Mom?"
Jonathan asked, his voice filled with concern. Dorothy paused, her eyes meeting her son's. "I'm better, Jonathan," she said, her tone gentle but sincere.
"I can't say I've forgotten everything, but being here with you and Lisa feels like a rebirth." Jonathan couldn't hold back.
He pulled his mother into a tight hug.
"Mom, I promise I'll never let anything like that happen to you again. Our family will always stand together."
Dorothy nodded, her eyes welling up with tears of emotion.
"I know, Jonathan. You've done everything a son could do, and I'm so proud of you." The rest of their time in the Maldives passed in tranquility and peace.
Dorothy adjusted to the slow pace of life, spending her days walking along the shore, watching sunsets, and sharing stories of Jonathan's childhood with Caleb. One afternoon, as she sat on a shaded lounge chair under the palms, Dorothy looked out at the sea, where Caleb was playing with his parents. A gentle smile spread across her lips. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly healed. Her scars no longer weighed her down but had become a source of strength, a reminder of her resilience and the love that surrounded her. When Dorothy's family returned from the Maldives, the public discourse around her story was still fervent. The hashtag Justice for Dorothy continued to spread globally, sparking conversations about police reform. The media kept reporting on the internal police investigation and the reforms being proposed by lawmakers. For Dorothy, the overwhelming support and love she received offered warmth, but she understood that the journey was far from over. Human rights organizations hosted workshops and campaigns that drew widespread public participation. Protests demanding systemic police reform were held in major cities, with Dorothy's image becoming a symbol of resilience. She was no longer just a victim but a representative for countless others who had suffered abuses of power. Jonathan, despite his discomfort with public attention, participated in a few conferences and gave heartfelt speeches. "My mother's story is a reminder that if we don't speak up, the voiceless will remain forgotten," he said during one address. "Justice is not just about punishment, it's about transforming a system so that no one else has to endure what my mother did." His words were widely quoted, igniting further hope for real change. Although justice was being served, Dorothy couldn't deny the deep impact of her experience. One morning, while the family was together, Lisa asked Dorothy, "Have you ever thought about forgiving Blake?" Dorothy remained silent for a long time, her gaze drifting toward the window where sunlight streamed through the trees. Finally, she answered softly, "Forgiveness isn't about letting him escape justice, Lisa. Forgiveness is about freeing ourselves from carrying hatred in our hearts." Her words left Jonathan and Lisa speechless. It wasn't weakness they heard but the strength of a heart that had endured pain and still held on to compassion. "But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, **, Dorothy added, her voice calm but resolute. "Justice must be served. People like him need to be held accountable, not just to protect others, but to teach them that every action has consequences." Jonathan nodded, his eyes filled with pride. He understood that his mother's strength wasn't just in her survival but in her ability to rise above the darkness. That night, after Dorothy had gone to bed, Jonathan sat alone in the living room. He gazed at a family photo on the table, a picture of his mother, Lisa, and Caleb laughing joyfully during their Maldives vacation. He reflected on everything that had happened, the pain, the outrage, and the hope that Dorothy's story had sparked in so many hearts. "I promise you, Mom, **, Jonathan whispered, his gaze fixed in the distance. "I'll do everything I can to ensure no one else has to go through what you did. Justice isn't just a destination, it's a path we must keep walking." The next day, Dorothy decided to go out on her own for the first time since the incident. Jonathan and Lisa were initially worried, but Dorothy reassured them. "I need to do this, **, she said, her voice firm yet gentle. Stepping outside, Dorothy felt the soft breeze on her face. Each step she took along the familiar streets was a declaration that she was no longer afraid. The painful memories remained, but they no longer defined her. When she reached the nearby park, sunlight filtered through the trees, and Dorothy paused to take a deep breath. A group of children playing nearby reminded her of the days when she used to teach kids in her community. A light smile graced her lips. "The road ahead is long, **, Dorothy thought to herself, "but I'm ready to walk it." The final scene closes with Dorothy sitting on a park bench, her gaze bright with peace and hope. Her story is no longer just a personal journey but a powerful reminder to society that justice is never too late and compassion can heal even the deepest wounds. A closing message appears on the screen. Justice is not just about punishment, it's about change. Don't let injustice be a part of life. Speak up, take action, and make a difference. Dorothy's story transcends personal tragedy, becoming a testament to the strength of family, the power of compassion, and the pursuit of justice. Here's a continuation of Dorothy's story, exploring her journey as a symbol of hope and change, as well as the ongoing efforts for justice and reform. Dorothy's return to the park marked the beginning of her re-engagement with the community she had always cherished. Sitting on the bench, she watched the children laugh and play, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the darkness she had endured. It reminded her of why she had dedicated her life to helping others, to ensure a better future for the next generation. Over time, Dorothy became an advocate for change. With Jonathan's and Lisa's support, she began speaking at community centers, schools, and public forums. Though her voice trembled at first, it grew stronger with each word. "I was a victim of injustice, she would say, her gaze steady and unwavering. But I won't let my story end in silence. I stand here today to remind everyone that no matter your age, background, or situation, your voice matters." Her speeches resonated deeply, especially with those who had experienced similar struggles. People from all walks of life reached out to share their stories. Survivors of police abuse, families who had lost loved ones to systemic injustices, and activists who had been tirelessly fighting for change all found inspiration in Dorothy's courage. ###A movement grows stronger. Dorothy's advocacy fueled the momentum of the #Justice for Dorothy movement. What had started as a call for justice in one woman's case evolved into a nationwide push for systemic reform. Public officials who once ignored complaints of police misconduct were now under immense pressure to act. Jonathan, using his military connections and leadership skills, became a strategic advisor for the movement. He worked closely with activists, human rights organizations, and lawmakers to draft policies aimed at increasing accountability and transparency in law enforcement. One of the movement's key victories was the establishment of an independent oversight committee tasked with investigating complaints of police misconduct. The committee was composed of civilians, legal experts, and human rights advocates, ensuring a fair and impartial review process. #Dorothy's new mission. Dorothy's experiences inspired her to create a foundation dedicated to empowering victims of abuse and educating communities about their rights. She named it the Light of Justice Foundation to honor the resilience of those who refuse to let injustice define them. The foundation provided legal assistance, counseling, and workshops on navigating encounters with law enforcement. Dorothy herself led many of the sessions, sharing her story and teaching others how to stand up for their rights. During one of these sessions, a young woman approached Dorothy with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Dorothy, your story gave me the courage to speak out about what happened to my brother. For years, I stayed silent because I didn't think anyone would listen. But now I know we have to fight for justice together." Dorothy embraced the young woman, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. "You are stronger than you think," she said gently. "And together, we will make sure your brother's story is heard." Facing Blake again. Months after Blake's arrest, the trial began. Dorothy, Jonathan, and Lisa attended every hearing, their presence a quiet but powerful statement. Blake, once confident in his ability to evade accountability, now sat before the court with the weight of his actions laid bare. Witnesses, including the homeless man who had tried to help Dorothy, testified against him. Surveillance footage, combined with evidence uncovered by Jonathan and his team, painted a damning picture of a man who had repeatedly abused his authority. When it was Dorothy's turn to speak, the courtroom fell silent. She stood, her frail figure belying the strength in her voice. "Officer Blake, she began, her tone steady, "you left me tied to a lamppost, humiliated and terrified, believing no one cared. But you were wrong. My family cared. My community cared. And now, this entire nation cares. You used your power to harm others, but we will use our voices to bring about change." Her testimony was met with quiet tears from those in the audience. Even Blake, for a brief moment, seemed to grasp the magnitude of his actions. Justice prevails. Blake was found guilty of multiple charges, including assault, abuse of power, and falsifying reports. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and his conviction sent a powerful message: no one, no matter their position, is above the law. The trial's conclusion brought a sense of closure for Dorothy and her family. But more importantly, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in the fight for justice. Looking ahead. As the months turned into years, Dorothy's influence continued to grow. The Light of Justice Foundation expanded its reach, opening chapters in cities across the country. Dorothy, though older and moving at a slower pace, remained at the heart of its mission. One day, as she sat in her office surrounded by letters of gratitude from people her foundation had helped, Jonathan walked in with Caleb. "Grandma, ***, Caleb said excitedly, holding a drawing in his hands. "I made this for you." Dorothy took the drawing, a colorful depiction of a superhero with a cape and a bright smile. Beneath it, Caleb had written in large, wobbly letters, "Super Grandma." Tears filled Dorothy's eyes as she hugged her grandson. "Thank you, Caleb. But do you know what makes a real superhero?" Caleb tilted his head, curious. "What?" "It's not about being strong or fast, ***, Dorothy said, her voice soft but firm. "It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And that's what you and I will always do." As Dorothy looked out the window at the bustling city below, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey had been one of pain, resilience, and ultimately, hope. Though the road ahead was still long, she knew she was not walking it alone. Together, with her family and the countless people inspired by her story, they were creating a brighter, more just world. ###A legacy of justice. Years later, Dorothy's name had become synonymous with resilience and justice. The reforms sparked by her story were celebrated nationwide, but her work continued, shaping future generations. Dorothy, though older and more fragile, remained a beacon of strength. Her speeches and teachings were passed down to young activists eager to continue her fight. Jonathan, having transitioned from his military role to a leadership position in public service, played a pivotal part in maintaining the momentum for systemic reform. He often spoke of his mother in his addresses, highlighting her bravery and the values she had instilled in him. "My mother taught me that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, we must be the light. Her courage changed not just my life but countless others, ***, he would say. Dorothy's reflection. One sunny afternoon, Dorothy sat in her garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and the sound of birdsong. She held a leather-bound journal filled with letters and drawings from people her foundation had helped. Each page told a story of hope, resilience, and change. Lisa joined her with 2 cups of tea, setting one gently on the table. "You've done so much, Mom," Lisa said, her tone filled with admiration. "You've shown the world what true strength looks like." Dorothy smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "It was all of you, Jonathan, you, Caleb, and everyone who believed in a better world. I only lit the flame, you all kept it burning." Caleb's promise. Caleb, now a teenager, had grown into a thoughtful and compassionate young man. Inspired by his grandmother, he decided to follow in Jonathan's footsteps, aiming to make a difference. One evening, he sat with Dorothy, eagerly sharing his plans. "Grandma, I want to study law and fight for justice, just like you and Dad, ***, he said, his eyes shining with determination. Dorothy reached out and held his hand. "Caleb, the world needs people like you, people who care, who won't turn a blind eye. Promise me one thing, though." "Anything, Grandma, ***, Caleb replied. "Always remember that justice isn't just about punishment, ***, Dorothy said softly. "It's about compassion, understanding, and creating a world where everyone feels safe and valued." Caleb nodded solemnly. "I promise, Grandma." ###A farewell and a new chapter. As the years went by, Dorothy's health began to decline. Despite her physical frailty, her spirit remained unbroken. On her final birthday, the family gathered in the same park where Dorothy had reclaimed her strength years earlier. Friends, community members, and activists joined to celebrate her life and legacy. Jonathan gave a heartfelt speech, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "My mother taught us all what it means to fight for what's right. Her legacy is not just in the changes we've made but in the hope she's inspired. Mom, you will always be our guiding light." Dorothy passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by her loved ones. Her departure left a void, but her legacy lived on in the hearts of everyone she had touched. ###A future built on hope. The Light of Justice Foundation continued to grow,
led by Jonathan and later Caleb.
Schools, community centers, and institutions across the country incorporated Dorothy's story into their teachings, ensuring that future generations would learn the importance of courage, kindness, and justice. On the anniversary of Dorothy's passing, a statue was unveiled in her honor at the park where she had rediscovered her strength.
The inscription read, "Dorothy Harris, a voice for the voiceless, a light in the darkness."
Families gathered to tell her story, children played near the statue, and activists found renewed inspiration in her example. Dorothy's legacy had become a cornerstone in the fight for a fairer world.